So we're making good progress here, but right now the metadata is missing. The metadata which I wanted to display below all these meal titles. And for this, I have this row here, but of course at the moment this row is empty. Now my goal is to output the duration, the complexity, and the affordability of every meal in that row. And if you take a look at the dummy data again, this is all data we are storing in there: affordability, complexity, and duration. Affordability and complexity are enum values, and duration is simply an integer. So we have this data, we now just need to output it here. Now for every metadata item in this row here, I plan to have an icon with some text next to it. And since I will repeat that same combination of icon and text 3 times, it makes sense to create a custom widget here, which we can repeat, instead of copy and pasting a bunch of code. And therefore I'll create a new widget here. MealItem trait.dart is the file name. And in there I have my MealItem trait class, which extends stateless widget because we won't need to manage any state in here. And we should import material.dart here. And then as always, we have the build method and then our constructor function, MealItem trait. And we'll get some input data here. To be precise, I expect to get the icon that should be displayed, which should be of type icon data, because that is the kind of data the built-in icon widget wants later on. And I want to get a string, the label, that should be shown next to the icon. And here in the build method, I then want to output a row which has this icon as a first widget, then a sized box for some spacing, and then a text widget that displays the label. Now for that, of course, in this constructor, we should accept and forward the key parameter, but then also require and set the icon and the label, like this. And with this all accepted and set, we can use it down here. For example, with the built-in icon widget, this, as mentioned, wants an icon data value as a first positional argument. So therefore here I can use this icon, which we have as a property and which we're getting as a parameter, as a value here. And I'll actually also give this icon a fixed size by setting the size parameter that's accepted by the built-in icon widget and set this to 17. And I'll set the color of the icon to white, like this. Now for the sized box, I simply want to have some width between icon and text, so some spacing, and I'll set this to a width of 6. And for the text, this of course should output the label, but here I'll then also add some styling, some text style, where I simply want to ensure that we always have some white text here, so that this label is always white. And this can be turned into a constant object here. And that's already all. This is my MealItem trait widget, which I can now reuse inside of the MealItem Dart file. Here in this row at the bottom, I'll add a first MealItem trait. And of course, as always, for that you should make sure that you import this MealItem trait.dart file in which we just worked. And then here we can set an icon and then a label. Now the first piece of metadata which I want to output here is the duration. And for that I think the schedule icon is quite good, because that's this little clock icon here. Well, and then the label is the meal duration, but that, as mentioned before, is an integer. And of course, label wants a string, and therefore we have to convert this to a string either by calling toString, or what I'll actually do here, by wrapping this with single quotes and then using this injection syntax here, about which you learned earlier, which also allows me to then add a blank and then min for minutes thereafter, to make this a bit more meaningful and useful to the users of our app. So that's my first MealItem trait being used here. Now if I save this and reload, you therefore see this item here below the title. And you see that for all the meals, of course. Now, by the way, you might be wondering why here we can use a row, which my meal item trait returns in the end, inside of another row. Normally we would get an error and we would need to use expanded, right? Well, here it works without expanded because this row is inside of a column which is inside of this positioned widget, which has left and right set to 0. Therefore, this positioned widget enforces its child, the container, to take exactly that width between the left border of this stack and the right border of this stack. And therefore, we actually have a fixed width, and this fixed width is passed down from the container to the column and from the column to this row. So therefore, this row here is not unconstrained horizontally, and hence it has no problem with another row being inside of it, because even though this row here is unconstrained horizontally, there is a maximum width applied by this row to this meal item trait here. That's how this works here. So that's the first piece of metadata being output here. Then I'll add a sized box here for some spacing with a width of, let's say, 12. And then the next meal item trait. But here I'm not outputting the duration, but instead the complexity. And I think here the work item is a good choice. Now here I therefore want to output the complexity, but the complexity is an enum. And if we take a look at the dummy data, we see that it, for example, is a complexity of simple. Now, I'm fine with using this as a text, but I want to make sure that it starts with an uppercase character instead of a lowercase character. And to ensure that this is the case, we need to transform this text here. And for that, I'll add a simple getter to my meal item class here, a getter that will return a string, and a getter which I'll name complexity text without these parentheses here. And in there we can now return meal.complexity.name, because name gives you access to the enum value as a string. And I'll access the first character by using square brackets 0 here, which is a notation you know from lists. This accesses the first list item. Well, turns out that you can use the same notation on string to access the different characters. So this is used to access the first character in a string, because just as in lists, the character indexes start at 0. And now we can call the built-in toUppercase method on this first character to transform it to uppercase. But of course, now we would return only the first character in uppercase. And that's of course not what I want. I still want to return the entire word in the end. So therefore we have to combine this uppercase first character with the rest of the word. And we can do this with the plus operator. You know this operator from mathematical operations, but it can indeed also be used with strings to concatenate two strings. For example, hello plus world would yield hello world, like this. So therefore here I want to concatenate this uppercase character with the rest of this word. So I'll again access meal complexity name. And now to get the word without the first character, we can use the built-in substring method, which is a method that's built into Dart and available on all strings. And substring simply returns a part of a string, starting at start and potentially ending at end, where start and end are string indexes. So here, since strings start at index 0, I pass 1 as a value because I don't want to start at the first character, but at the second character, since the first character is converted to uppercase here, and I then want to append the rest of the word starting at the second character. So that's how we can transform this complexity text, and then we can use this complexity text down there. So instead of accessing meal.complexity, I access complexity text. And now we can actually get rid of these curly braces here, since we now have a simple variable or property that we're accessing here instead of a more complex expression. Well, and now we can repeat that and again add a sized box with the width set to 12, and then one last meal item trait where I'll choose an icon of attach money, which is this icon here, to output the affordability of the meal. And this is also an enum and therefore should be transformed in the same way. So therefore I'll just copy this code from there and create a new getter called affordability text. And here I access meal.affordability. And I also do this here. And with that, we got this affordability text, which now is output in that last meal item trait item. And of course, I also want to get rid of min here because we don't need that. And therefore, we can actually get rid of this entire injection syntax because we don't need it anymore, because I just want to output the complexity or affordability texts. Well, and with that, finally, if we save this, you will see that if you restart this, now you got all these metadata items below the title of the meal. Now, as a last step, I want to make sure that this metadata is centered, because right now it's clearly not centered below the title. And to achieve this, in my metadata row here, I'll add a main axis alignment of main axis alignment center. The main axis in a row is from left to right, so this will center the items horizontally. And with that, this now looks much better. So now it's time to make sure that we can also tap those items and then navigate to the meal detail screen.